Jack here, JBF Music and Guitar Lessons. Alright, so I'm going to go through that bar by bar and then break down what's going on. A lot of these techniques I have covered before in previous lessons, so I'll link to them as we go through it. I don't have access to the stems or the master track, so it might be a wee bit off in places here, but overall it sounds pretty right to me. Corrections, suggestions or other input, as always, more than welcome in the comments down there. So first off, we'll have a quick overview on the tone, style and just general information I find out about the solo. In terms of the tone, it's fairly dark with not too much treble, but by no means is it lost in the mix. It's quite saturated with rather a lot of gain, maybe like a Mesa Boogie type amp, something along those lines. It's pretty smooth and quite a processed signal, maybe with a drive pedal and or compressor in front of the amp. The delays, bonus tip. The delay sounds like it's being ridden, so by that I mean the producer adds in more or less delay depending on what's happening in the solo. The leads in Judas Priest's album Painkiller, and in fact that title track, have great examples of this. Over the longer sustained notes, usually a bend, there's more delay, and then on the faster, more intricate parts, there's less delay, and this helps keep things sounding big, while making sure the more precise playing can be cleanly heard. Anyway, I guess there's some reverb and some sort of modulation effect, maybe a chorus and or a pitch shift, and I don't mean a whammy type of pitch shifting unit. More one that will let you put the guitar by a few cents either side, so you can either make it a bit lower in pitch or a little bit higher, usually hard panned left and one right. Some very fast vibrato in parts, which could be thinner strings, or might have been played at half speed then sped up to suit the electronic aesthetic of the track. If you've ever done this before, you played something slow and then sped it up, you tend to get a slight modulation effect and things sound a bit wobbly but also just like really quite cool. Now I'm totally speculating here and I could be way off the mark, but I'll point out any of these bits if hopefully I can remember whenever we come to them. But this wobbly sound I'm talking about could also be the aforementioned pitch chorus type effect, which is probably more likely as the player can quite clearly rip it up. Overall, an 80s vibe, and the wah-wah really helps make the lead lines a bit more vocal or, emotional, for lack of a better word. It sounds like it's multiple shorter licks that have been improvised and edited together, rather than one long single take or a written out solo. Again, speculation here, but that's what my ears are telling me. Stylistically, I'd say this takes influence from Zakk Wylde, Buckethead, Van Halen, and maybe Slash, or some more of the kind of Steve Vai bluesy licks, maybe more of his kind of Dorian things. Based mainly in the Pentatonic, as far as I can tell, this was played by Andrew Watt, who's played guitar for Post Malone in the past, co-written and collaborated on songs with him, and it also sounds like he's his touring guitarist. It looks like he uses orange amps and generally plays Les Pauls or SGs, sometimes a Telecaster. So if he did play the solo, it's fairly likely he did use the Les Paul through an orange. That would make sense to me. That is more or less what it sounds like. I mean, the studios do tend to have a lot of gear, a lot of nice high-end gear. It might not be the case here that he's played through something different, but he could have. An orange or a Mesa or some sort of relatively high-gain amp is going to get you in the ballpark. And even if you're playing with like single coils, it's not a huge difference. Overall, I'd say the solo is going for vibe more than anything else, not like targeting the notes and following the chords too much, but I'll go into that a bit later on. But yeah, starting off with some Van Halen vibes. On the neck pickup, I think, rake into this full tone bend. It's a double bend really. And then tapping this note up here, while sustaining the bend. A bit trickier than just playing the 9th fret on the high E string, but it'll give you this kind of haunting sound and timbre. I've covered this particular technique, this bending tap technique, in much more detail before, so check the lesson card in the top right if you want a lengthier breakdown on this particular guitar technique. It's up to you if you add vibrato with the right or the left hand. You could add with the right, by just moving your right hand. To me that doesn't sound great, I don't have that technique particularly down, so I tend to use my left hand. You might also notice that I've opted to pull the string down rather than push it up, so I just find I have much more control this way, particularly if I'm tapping a note. Then we have the same idea but tapping higher. And then the third time it's a single bend rather than a double. I really love stuff like this. It just makes the guitar solo sound so much less formulaic and much more organic. A very subtle variation, but a great idea nonetheless. If you excuse the sloppy notes there, let's try that one more time. There we go. And then a really cool chromatic bend thing going on here. We're pre-bending this 9th fret up a tone, and then we're starting with the tap here. So you bend the note, but don't play it. Then tap that tap note on the 11th fret. That should be the first note you hear, that 11th fret. And then we're just returning the note gradually to pitch. There are 6 notes that are fully tapped when it's fully bent. You're just kind of pulling off to this 9th fret that's bent here, as I say. And then we've got sort of slowly releasing the bend over the next 4 notes, leaving the last 2 pretty much unbent. So you got... This is the sort of thing that is more common to do with a whammy bar, but given that we've started with tapping, and as far as I can tell, if I've got the guitarist right, as Andrew Watt guy, he doesn't seem like he plays with whammy bars, so I think this isn't the technique he's using. And it's a great way of making things sound like a whammy bar if you don't have one. We are then using the last 2 beats of the bar to pick up into the next line, this kind of hammer-on thing. This is where the wah pedal comes into play, and this part reminds me a bit more of Zakk Wylde. Here we bend that 16th fret up a tone and add some vibrato. You might notice I'm doing the kind of pulling down thing for a nice kind of wide controlled vibrato, a bit more in the style of Zakk Wylde. At this point I'm also switching to my bridge pickup, where I just stay on there for the rest of the solo. On a side note, I've tried to notate all the rakes, like that one we've got at the end of the bar up here, at the end of the first bar. I might have missed some out, and I might add some in accidentally if I'm just getting into it. So if in doubt, just use the original as a reference if you want to be totally meticulous about such things. So we've got another full tone bend on the 18th fret, and then we've got this kind of phrase. So we're hitting the note, putting some vibrato if you want, but I don't think he includes any here. Then when it's still being bent, we hit it one more time, and then one more time release the bend. I think this 16th fret, that grace note there, is in the solo, but it's very quick, so grace notes, you don't really hear them, they're more of like a just kind of a decoration type thing. It might not be there, and it's totally up to you whether you want to play this note or not, but it's more of a guitaristic thing to do, kind of thing, just to add it in. Then we have the first bit of shred in the next bar here after a full tone bend. So we have this bend, then so I'm just doing quick hammers and pull-offs for this kind of trill thing. Got 16, 17, 16, down to the 18, then the same thing again. 16th fret once more, and then that 18th fret, bending with, again, a nice wide vibrato. And with stuff like this, a bonus tip I suppose, you might have noticed when I started bending that note, my hand went a bit weird. Turn the angle. What I was doing in that bend in particular is this. So you'll notice my thumb is resting on these strings here, the A, the E, the A and the D, and I've got my kind of these fingers resting on the E strings and or the B one. And all this kind of means is you're going to reduce sloth a little bit. So say if I don't do any of that, and I go, and I was actually okay. But after a while, I'm starting to get these strings coming in. With my hands there, that doesn't happen. Particularly if you're playing live and it's loud, and you're kind of wanting to generate feedback, if you can stop the other strings making noise, that's going to be a good thing. So, in the next bar, we've got a much more Buckethead inspired line here, picking through a C sharp minor arpeggio, and then a B major one. Then we've got some 17th fret full tone bends, being followed with a pull off for the 14th. Well, for more on Buckethead, check out that lesson card in the top right. But then we get that motif repeated, so we get that. And then the 14th fret again. The next lick is a bit more slash-like, or again, maybe Zakk Wylde. We have the bend on the 11th fret, full tone bend. Then this little hammer pull-up thing, between the 9th and the 12th. Followed by an 11th fret grace note, so another one of those kind of quick notes. And I'm not totally sure on this bit, but it sounds like he's sliding up to the 13th fret. We've got a kind of slightly off-sounding bend. It might be up to the 14th fret, but I think it's as I say, the 13th. And this is the sort of thing, it sounds a little bit like an outtake, which if a guitarist was left to their own devices, they might not particularly want on a record, but it's the sort of lick that a good producer will keep on because it just sounds pretty cool. So yeah, we've got that. Then to finish it off, little pull off, 11 to the 9, down to 11, 9. I should add in there that there is a wide vibrato on that 9th fret there. A much more Buckethead or Steve Vai style line here, which starts with 2 16th notes, then has triplets for the rest of the bar. So just watch out for the timing on this one. This took me a little bit to get my head around what was going on. But yeah, we've got the 14th fret on the B, to the 16th on the G. Those are the two aforementioned 16th notes. Then what I would call the embellished trill. So for more on that, check out my Dave Murray lesson card, which is up there in the top right. We have those. Then we have the embellished trill, which is you hammer on from the 14th to the 17th, pull off to the 14th, then the 16th. And we repeat this grouping, this particular one 3 times. 1, 2, 3. Then there's a variation where instead of going between the 14th and the 17th frets, we go between the 14th and the 16th on the B string. So very similar, but instead of being here, we're now here. So, and that just happens twice. Then we end things up on that 14th fret. So to recap that bit, you've got these 2 notes as 16ths, then the rest is all triplets. We have 3 of these, 2 of these, ending up on here. As a side note, this bar it sounds like it's played on the B and G strings like I'm doing here to me, because you can get a bit more palm muting on them then. So we could play it here. It sounds like he's employing a really tiny bit, if it is the guy that I think if it's this Andrew Watt guy, sounds like there's been a really light bit of palm muting. Just to clean it up. So for comparison, no palm muting. And I'll bring it in. So I'm just doing a really light palm mute just around here. It just helps clean things up a tiny bit. So it sounds like it's on these 2 strings, as I say, to me, rather than here. I also find it easier to play here than here. So it is maybe worth, as a side note here again, maybe experimenting different positions to see where you prefer to play it. Like I said, this box I find trickier to do. But you might prefer that one. The advantage of playing it here is in the next bar, we have a kind of like a jumped blues lick, which again, it sounds like it's being played in this position rather than down there kind of thing. Which you could play it here as well. This is what I'm talking about. You could move things about if you want. This is just the way I've done it. A combination of, I've basically gone with what I think is being done in the record, and coincidentally, it seems to have worked out in my favour here in terms of keeping things easier. But when in doubt, I would always opt to move things to a position of the fretboard that you find most comfortable, because particularly in a live context, the difference between a note being played here and here is so minimal, it really doesn't make that much of a difference. A very quick jumped blues lick in the next bar, and what I mean by jumped blues is like, you've taken blues and then it's been sped up, it's been put through overdrive, it's like a hyper-driven blues lick. A strong pick attack here will get it sounding a bit more authentic as well, so you could play it more softly. It sounds fine, but if you want a bit more snap, and all I'm going to do is dig in a bit harder with my pick. Maybe rather than using the flat side of it, maybe edge picking a bit more as well, for that kind of, you get a kind of snap and this kind of a bit more attitude and aggression. When you're playing it up at speed, it is, it's not the easiest thing to do, but if you work at it, I'm sure you can probably get it there. So what we've got going on, let's break it down. We've got a 12th fret full tone bend. Try that once more. There we go. I think it's pulling off to the 9th. Then we get this kind of pull off between the 11th and the 9th on the G, and then we have another full tone bend on this 11th fret. Pull off to the 9th. Then we have the 11th fret. And then I think it's a slide from the 9th to the 6th fret back on the G string. We don't get much of a rest here, it's just going at it all guns blazing. Next up, again going for more kind of Zakk Wylde, or maybe like a bluesy Buckethead or Slash vibe. We're bending these 4 notes each up a tone and breaking into all of them for that kind of added aggression kind of thing. What's particularly cool here that you'll notice in the tab is the first bend starts in kind of an odd place in the bar, or at least not at the start of the bar, so it just makes things sound a bit more kind of frantic, like the notes are trying to sort of pop out and escape from the solo or something. But yeah, just bending up a tone, so we start on that 16th fret. And you want that first one to maybe be a little bit staccato, kind of like that, and rather than being... The first one's got a bit more kind of shorter, then the next ones are a little bit longer, I'd say. And then 21st fret. then what is kind of like a bit of a double stop here. It's really cool, this one. I'm totally stealing this idea. Bending the 20th fret up, semitone, and then I think the 19th fret is ringing into this slightly. And then the 19th fret is released for the 20th to be played once more with vibrato. So, if you let them ring into each other all the way through, it can get a bit muddy. You hear that kind of weird, like ring mod type thing between the notes. If you don't let them ring in at all, it's a bit clean. So the happy medium, which I think is happening here, but again, I don't have access to the stem, so I can't totally tell, that this is being bent up. 19's being ringing onto, and then we release the 19 and have a really big wide vibrato on the 20th fret. So rather than sustain the bend and kind of bring in vibrato, the way I'd approach this one is just try to think about bending this note up. So rather than thinking of vibrato, just think bend. And you're probably going to get a bit more in the kind of ballpark for that sort of sound. And then to wind up this bar, we're going to a kind of more traditional blues scale lick. Slide up to the 18th fret, just from anywhere below, doesn't really matter. And then the 17th. I went too high there, didn't I? Yeah, so 18th, and then the 17th. That is actually a bonus tip here. This is a downside I learned this solo when I was transcribing it on a Telecaster, which has got a lot less frets. So just watch out, if you do learn something on one guitar, make sure you practice it on another, because the dots are always slightly different. I'm sure most people have probably had a few horrendous occasions live where they've changed guitar and not bothered to practice it and get used to where the dots are and just gone totally out of key. I can put my hands up, that's happened to me on more than one occasion. But tangents aside, and to get back on track, we are then pre-bending the 19th fret up by a semitone, releasing the bend back to pitch, and then playing that same fret again. Then we have this 17, 19, 17, and we play that full phrase again if you count the last two notes we had from the previous bar. That's sliding to the 18th and then the 17th. I should also mention, when you land on that 17th fret at the end of that phrase, you want a vibrato there. So, it's quite fast, and I suspect the way forward is to pull this down rather than push it up. So, in fact, I'll flip around again. I would find if you want this kind of wild, wide vibrato, for me, I'm kind of like doing a different grip. I'm doing more of this kind of pincer thing going on, and just pulling this finger down, which is different. Normally I'd go for a more kind of circular, subtle vibrato, but if you want a kind of more, a wider one that you still have quite good control over, pulling it down. In fact, you can kind of do both. You can circulate it, but it's not quite as wild if you want it to have a bit more edge and not totally be on pitch. That is one of the many techniques you can use to do that. So like I say, we got that. And then the phrase again. Then kind of like a variation on this phrase. We're starting off with the same first two notes, these sliding in ones. And then a nice little grace note going from the 19th to the 20th fret, sliding that. And then we have the 19, 17, 19, 17, 18. And then that phrase repeats again from where we slid from the 19th to the 20th fret. It's also worth pointing out that along with this variation, we've gone from kind of using 16th and 8th notes into triplets, so it feels a bit different again, even though they're quite similar phrases. So that's the cool thing. If you're playing something and you don't want it to be too repetitive, you can do a slight variation like they've done here with the melody. And then also consider changing the timing, so here triplets are a fantastic example of that. And very similar to the last phrase, this one also gets repeated twice. Now the fingering for this one might be a bit tricky, and it might be easier again to move this lick to a different place. The way I think I'm doing it here, if I slow it down I might change it, so I do apologise. But I'm sliding my third finger up here, using my second finger for this 19th fret, sorry. First finger for the 17th. Then I'm reverting to using my third finger for the 19th fret. 17th and the first again, and this frees up this finger for the 18th fret. Let's do that slowly. That's just what works for me and what seems to trip me up the least. You might have something quite different. And then after this happens twice, as I say, we get a tone and a half bend on the 21st fret. So you're aiming for this note here. And then we have this note unbent twice. And that kind of partial pinch on the 19th fret. I think it's around here. Yeah, I think that's the pitch. So I think if you want to think in terms of frets, that might be the 31st fret. It's a kind of partial one, so if you don't hit it, it's still going to sound cool. And again, that kind of pulling down vibrato thing and adding that in there to get that kind of wide, wild sound. Finally, some Eddie Van Halen tricks to wrap things up. What's also cool here is this is the first kind of breather you get in the solo. It's only a beat rest, but because you've been kind of ripping it up throughout the solo, it's noticeable, or at least it was for me when transcribing it. But this is kind of cool because it gives you like a final kind of breather, a little moment of rest before this big kind of climax here. So we're trying picking up the scale. We've got the 14th fret, 16, 17, 19, 17, 16, 14. And trend picking, you're just like picking the note as quickly as you can, but making sure you move in time. Then we have the 16th fret, and this is where I'd maybe employ a more subtle or circular vibrato rather than the kind of wider ones we've been using. We have a bend that I've notated as a semitone. Then you return that to pitch and pull up to the 14th. Now I say notated it as a semitone because I think it is actually a tad sharp rather than being... I think it's actually... So what's happening there is rather than aiming for the 17th fret or the 18th fret, we're aiming for somewhere in between, so 17 and a little bit, maybe around there. So this is the sort of thing that you'll hear in like a slash solo, for example, and it'll often add in a bit more of an emotional kind of impact to the solo. It's definitely a thing you can choose to do. Sometimes it'll sound great and other times it won't. And again, I spoke before about sometimes as guitarists we might play a solo and there'll be a bit in it that's it's not technically correct or we would think of a mistake. So this is the sort of thing that might jump out at you when you're listening back to a solo and you're like, I want to overdub that. But if you've got a good producer or if you're just making it with your friends, if they really like that bit, even if it's something like this, like where it's a bend that's slightly out of tune, keep it in. Because you'll be critiquing your own playing, and sometimes in doing so, you won't hear what's actually best for the song and what suits it. And I think this bend's a great example of that. It's just kind of overreaches a little bit and really helps kind of wrap things up. As I say, for lack of a better term, the more emotional impact. So my rambling aside, we've just got one bar to go here, and we've got the 19th fret where we're doing full tone bends, 3 of them. So you want to watch out here, there's a bit of syncopation, things are not totally on the beat. The first two are, you've got 1, 2, and you might want to play this on the third beat of the bar, you might want to go. It's on the and of 3, so you'd have 1 add, 2 add, 3 add. Do that once more, a bit slower. 1 and 2 and 3 add. And that last one you probably want to slide it down as well. Slide it down off the fretboard, I mean. So, there we have it. Now usually I dive much more into the music theory here, but I get the distinct impression the guitar player is trying to generate more of a vibe than being too strict with following the chords. For reference, I looked at the intro guitar riff, which you can learn with the Learn Riff Snare card on the top right, and then use the vocal melody to work out what I think the implied chords are. I could be wrong here, so please voice any different opinions in those comments. In particular, for example, the first 2 bars could be E major. I think the second one, specifically, you could have an E major, which I'm thinking of as a C sharp minor. You could also think of as a C sharp minor 7. The reason I've come to the conclusion that it's probably minor rather than major, rather than an E major. E major, just to clarify that, not a C sharp major, is because Ozzy's vocal in the verse suggests the minor because he's hitting this note quite a lot. Had he been hitting this note no more, I would have maybe opted for the major, but because this one's in here quite a bit, it sounds like it's probably a C minor to me. C sharp minor, I should say. And we more or less have this play that properly, oh dear. More or less have this C sharp minor, not whatever that chord was, jazz chord. We have this C sharp minor, and then the note underneath changes, which is basically a slash chord. So if you don't know what a slash chord is, it basically means the note underneath the chord is whatever is after the slash. So we start off with a C sharp minor. Then we have a C sharp minor / D sharp. So we find the D sharp, there's one here, and that sits under that C sharp minor triad. Then the C sharp minor / E, which is basically another C sharp minor, but with the minor third in the bass, because E is the flat third away from C sharp minor. So we could just call that a C sharp minor, but it does have a different melodic kind of purpose, or like a different emotional impact if you want to look at it that way. This. It does feel different, for lack of a better term. Then you could see this next chord as an A major 7, which if I heard that chord in isolation, might be easier to play the A there actually, in the open string. Yeah, there we go. If I heard that in isolation, I would think, oh, that's a major 7. But because all the other chords have been this C sharp minor triad with a different note underneath, I think that's what's going on. And if you look at these 3 notes here, which I was playing with my little finger before, if you think about the C sharp minor chord, you know, they're just taken from that. So we're just playing the same notes arranged in a slightly higher up the fretboard in a slightly different way. So therefore, what I would say is this is a C sharp minor with the 6 in the bass. It's a very 80s sound. What would it be? Yeah. So that the flat 6. Sorry. That A. So that'd be the lowest note in the chord. Let's put it down there to make it more obvious. So what you have is this triad sitting here, and the kind of bass, or whatever synth is in the bass, going up the scale and then down it to add a bit of tension. So it gives a kind of jazzy quality without having to be too, sophisticated with the chords. You just have one thing sitting here and everything else changing around it. A very good way of creating a kind of moody thing. So if you like kind of trap and electronica, that's a great tactic to use. Kind of pick one chord, just keep it there, and let the lower instrument kind of create the tension and release throughout this. Over the next 4 bars, things change a bit. It starts off the same with just a C sharp minor, and then we go down. So we're adding in the major 6th here, really quite tense. Then the flat 6th, which we've heard before. It's just a fairly Zakk Wylde thing to do, and it's also reminiscent for me of Stan, the Eminem song featuring Dido. So for those bars, what I would say is it would be a C sharp minor / A sharp, then C sharp minor / A, like we had before. There's quite a lot of tension in this one, but it does give you like a nice little bit of resolution, partly because we've heard it before as well. And then when we end up on the G sharp, it changes chord to a G sharp major. So this is the 5 chord of our C sharp minor. So it gives us a really good, strong resolution back to it. And it also sounds quite complete when we're coming down to it from this kind of descending bass line. Like that sounds complete. It doesn't necessarily feel like it needs to go there. Well, it does now that I've played it to me. But, so it works quite well. You can use this chord to get back to here with a nice strong cadence. But it also sounds fairly complete when it just ends on that chord. However, if you did want to follow the chords more, we could use something like modal interchange. For more on that, check out the prog metal soloing in 5 minutes lesson with the card up there. Yeah, but we could do something along these lines. So there I'm thinking of a C sharp minor, this pentatonic, and then adding in the second degree of the scale for a more kind of sad lulling quality. I did something along those lines. Then I'm thinking of a C sharp Dorian, just to get that major 6 there. So by that what I mean is, you know how we were talking before about this A sharp, this C sharp minor / A sharp? That's the major 6th. So I was just wanting to try and get that in my phrasing. I suspect I did something a bit like this. That sounds like the sort of Dorian thing I would play. And then after that, I'm thinking Aeolian, the natural minor. Almost identical, except the 6 is here, the flat 6 instead of the major 6. And again, that's because that's what's happened here. Or this slash note has moved down to the flat 6. So I probably just did a little type thing along there, just to reference it a little bit. You could use Phrygian there, but Aeolian is probably a bit of a tamer choice. And then I'm thinking of a G dominant 7, maybe with a flat 9. So sort of a Phrygian dominant type of sound. That kind of thing going on there. And the reason I'm thinking of the 7 is because, you know how we had this cadence earlier? Where this chord has come from, this G sharp is from the harmonic minor. And that's what you'd use over this would be the Phrygian dominant, because it would be the 5th chord, leading us back to the root of C sharp. But I mean, as you can probably hear yourself here, this is way less vibey than the original solo. And also, if you stick to mainly the minor pentatonic, the chord changers will sort of imply these different modes underneath without you having to do quite as much work. A win-win situation, really. I mean, it's not as if the guitar player's gone rogue. They're very much in key here, and you know, following the chords with those very first kind of raked bends. Because we're doing a C sharp, D sharp, and E, which is what's happening with the notes in the bass. You know how we're going up. C sharp, D sharp, E. If I can get that. And those are the notes that are being played, but just much higher on the fretboard. Beyond that, there's not a huge amount of following the chords from what I can tell. If you spot anything, do let me know, because it would be great if there's some obvious thing that I've missed out here. The C sharp minor arpeggio does a bit, but then there's a B major, which is pretty tense against the C sharp minor / D sharp. So I'll play that and I'll bring one up in the background and you can hear. But I mean, it doesn't really matter in this instance because it suits the song. That arpeggio bit in particular, I think, sits really nicely in this more kind of electro context. It's sort of bridging the gap between an arpeggiated or sequenced synth and just wailing 80s guitar shred. So while I do tend to harp on about following the chords an awful lot, because personally this is something that kind of held back my playing an awful lot, was not listening to what was going on underneath enough and not paying quite as much attention to it, or knowing how to follow the chords and then choosing not to. Sometimes, lads and ladies, and we've got about a 92% to about a 8% ratio of those genders there, judging by my stats, but sometimes you just got a whale. That was Take What You Want by Post Malone with Ozzy Osbourne featuring Travis Scott. The guitar solo played by, I think, Andrew Watt. Bit of a mouthful there. If you want more tabbed out solos broken down and explained like this, check out this playlist here. I generally just do this for solos I can't find accurate tabs or lessons for online. For more cool licks, check out this video. If you enjoyed this, want to help the channel grow, stay up to date with new content, hit subscribe, share it across social media platforms, press like, leave me a comment, and enable notifications by ringing that little bell on the side, if you feel so inclined. Cheers guys.